Welcome to Brash Ag, the farm innovation podcast with hosts Raymond King and Kit Franklin.
Namaste, Raymond.
Namaste. We're apart again now. We did recording not that long ago where we were back in your dining room, and that was good to catch up with you. And hopefully that one will go out soon. We're going to mention that one now.
Yeah, let's not try and say if it's before or after, because where the podcast goes, no one knows. But but look out for an episode with Roger talking about his electric tractor. It was a really, really insightful conversation. And yes, as you say, Ray, it was in person again. We've done a lot in person recently, what with cereals and then that conversation with Roger. So what have you been up to today, Ray? Anything exciting? Back to the real work?
Well, no, not really. Well, kind of. Yeah, this morning I was at my daughter's sports day, so that was
the real work. That is the real
exactly.
Work.
That was good fun. It was good to see that.
Did you have to do a dad's race?
No, they don't. It's not a school sports day. It's just a nursery one. So it's just trying to incentivize 3-year-olds to run up and down a very short track, which is quite funny to watch. So it was good fun. So how about you?
Same old. I've been in 3 or 4 meetings on the computer, and where's the day gone? Not very far. Let's crack on. We're joined today by Jamie Hutchinson of Cordon. Jamie, how are you getting on?
Very good, thank you. Lovely to be on the podcast.
Well, thanks very much for joining us. And we sort of reached out to you. I think I've been following Cordon on LinkedIn with various updates, and it looks sort of intrigued by the technology. But I think what really sparked our interest was you've had some interesting sort of funding updates, and then it sort of that kind of ticked me to dig into it a bit further and reach out to you. I think we've been connected for a while, but actually, reach out and get you on the pod. So I suppose before we dive into the exciting technologies that you're working on and the exciting funding that you've managed to land, it'd be great to get a little bit about your background and kind of how you found your way to where you are now, and a bit about Cordon just in general before we perhaps dive into a little bit more around the technology. So
yeah, sure. I guess I've had quite maybe a wandering path or a varied path that's kind of led me to where I am today. So I started. I grew up. You can probably tell by my accent, which is now a little bit confused because of so many places that I've lived. But I grew up in Belfast in the 70s and 80s. Then kind of did a degree at Oxford in chemistry. Decided as all good scientists should that science wasn't for me, and ended up in finance. So after a brief stint in consulting, I then spent 10 years actually as a venture capitalist. So I kind of did it the wrong way around. So really in retrospect, I should have been an entrepreneur first and then ended up in VC. But I started off really as a VC. So I spent 10 years with a couple of really big funds. So Apex Partners and a fund that became Draper Fisher in Europe called it was Cousin of Private Equity initially, but Draper Fisher Esprit was the final fund. And I invested in semiconductor companies and some technical software, sort of network management software companies, really during .com 1 and then just after that. Had some big successes, some big failures. Really enjoyed it. The fund that I was in was bought out by JP Morgan. I didn't really want to work for JP Morgan, so I suppose I sort of followed a passion that I'd been building for a while. All of my friends in venture capital were kind of spending their bonuses on fast cars or fast women, and I decided instead to kind of collect wines. I'd sort of my dad had taken us really across France regularly, when I was growing up. And I'd always sort of been slightly intrigued by the whole. I sort of preferred the vineyard visits to the Roman remains, and maybe that led to a sort of an underlying interest in what was in a bottle. And so that kind of developed as a hobby, I guess, whilst I was a VC. But then eventually I sort of had the opportunity. I always wanted to do something myself. And so I started a wine business as sort of my first kind of wine retail business as my first kind of startup. That's called The Sampler. It's a retailer, but a kind of a high-tech retailer, I guess. So we were pretty much the first people in the world to use enomatic sampling machines in order to let customers try the wines in the shop before they buy them. So it's just a way to use a sort of smart card system to dispense a small fraction of a bottle in order to try it first. That's a good way of getting away from a brand and more towards buying a wine that you actually like rather than one that you like the label of or that's had the biggest marketing budget on it. So that went really well. So we kind of grew that to a number of different sites, took it through to profitability. It's still profitable. I'm still the biggest shareholder there. Won UK Wine Retailer of the Year a number of times, different kind of awarding bodies, including Decanter. But we slightly ran out of demographics. So in about 2015, so I've been running it for about 10 years. It got to the point where we either needed to take it internationally, and to be honest, the company wasn't really big enough to do that. The risk was very high in doing that. Or we needed to run it for cash, which from a personal point of view, I just wasn't so keen to do. So I guess kind of continued the wine journey and moved to France, bought some land, built a winery, and applied for planting rights on an old abandoned vineyard that was in a village just outside the Jurançon region in the southwest of France. So spent 8 years doing that until I actually sold the business to start Cordon. But that we formed regeneratively, so we were pretty early on in sort of the regen process, started in 2015. We had geese in the vineyard tending the grass to kind of discourage weeds, which is one thing, if we come on to talk about regenerative practices, is one thing I would highly discourage. So geese are very entertaining and kind of rather beautiful, but also a complete pain in the backside to look after. So I spent half my time looking after geese rather than farming the land. So we planted Syrah. We made also wine from some Petit Manseng, which is one of the local grape varieties there. We made it relatively naturally and kind of small production, just a couple of hectares. Through that process, and I guess that idea behind regenerative farming of any type, you're really always conscious about your inputs. So how do you manage this in such a way that you can make it as circular as possible, and how do you minimize the inputs? And so we started off doing a lot of soil testing, basically within the vineyard, and that continued during the establishment period of the vines itself. And what became really obvious was that, in spite of all of the care and attention I was doing on the farming side, I was building copper in the soils. So I was using organic practices, which effectively forces the vigneron or the vine grower to spray copper sulfate, a Bordeaux mixture. And what we found was that in certain areas in the soils, and actually the areas that didn't really need the copper, they were building. So in the areas that were thinner in canopy, and therefore had better airflow, didn't have as much disease pressure, but also weren't catching as much of the copper within the canopy itself, and that was effectively drifting onto the soil and beginning to build up. And we did some studies in terms of earthworm kind of counting and various other sort of toxicology kind of analysis, and just found that basically we were slowly polluting the soil that I was spending all of my time trying to protect. So I started looking around. This is about 2020. Started looking for different ways of spraying. Yeah. So within viticulture and within all fruit farming basically, and within the majority of other farming, you have no choice, as you must spray basically if you're going to protect the crop. And if you're going to use sensible kind of approach towards fertilization, it's good to use it on a foliar basis as well. So you don't really have a choice, in my opinion, as to whether you spray, but you should have a choice in terms of how you spray. And it became clear to me, I just couldn't find, frankly, a sprayer that allowed me to spray in the way that I wanted to. So we had different grape varieties. They agronomically, they needed different treatments, ideally. So, there's different vigors between, say, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, or between Syrah and Petit Manseng. They don't suffer from diseases in the same way, and they have different requirements in terms of fertilizer. And yet, I couldn't find any machinery, basically, in order to enable me to apply the things that I wanted to apply separately. And the reality, which I think seems to escape a lot of agritech businesses, which are working within technologies and spraying, is that I had no interest at all in doing one input at a time. So you just don't have time to do 400 passes a year. I had barely enough time in order to do 20 passes or whatever I was doing in terms of on the spraying side. Each one took a whole day of spraying, and so you must do a tank mix. If you do a tank mix of pesticides and fertilizers, how do you vary one without varying the other? It just became clear to me that actually the solutions that I was saying that would allow me to maybe improve the deposition of a spray weren't really addressing the fundamental problem. And this led me to finding Cordon. So we think we were really addressing. So sort of maybe almost in a nutshell, I guess, how I see the problem, and how I think we're beginning to see a number of customers seeing the problem as well, is that spraying itself, just the way it's been sort of conceptualized, or the way it's imagined, is pretty stupid. It's a batch process. So you take your tank, you fill it with a concoction of different compounds. It doesn't really matter what treatment kind of regime you want to follow. You still fill it with a range of different chemicals, mix them up, and then spray them uniformly, basically over the field that you're going into. So that's kind of a batch process that's being applied to a very non-batch like rail situation in the field. So what our loop mixer tries to do, I guess, is to break that down into a continuous process. So we are trying to give the farmer control over their spray mix dynamically. On the first case, that's in order to tailor the treatment to the needs of the block. But it all, so if you want a bit more fertilizer somewhere or a little bit more pesticide somewhere, you can do that, and therefore you save a lot of chemicals because you don't overspray them. But then secondly, to do it in a way that actually makes your life easier rather than harder, so that you don't have to keep on handling the chemicals, you don't have to do nearly as many refills. You can just kind of get out and spray, basically, rather than endless numbers of endless amounts of kind of, I guess, operational inefficiency. So I suppose that's the genesis of the company. And yeah, we started about 3 years ago. And yes, as you've just said, we've just almost completely closed, but raised the majority of the current fundraising, which was announced, I think, this week or last week.
I mean, I think it's really interesting, actually, just getting your take on. We've kind of gone into Cordon stuff, but the sampler wine side of things is really interesting in terms of. I liked how you sort of managed to incorporate. You leverage technology there to actually open up retail opportunities for the product. Was that approach technology led, or was that just kind of like you had a problem and you needed a solution?
I think it was very much problem led. So if you think of wine as a curious agricultural product, it's almost uniquely commoditized. So all of the money basically goes to the people that can differentiate themselves most. It's the exact opposite of wheat, which is sold on a set price on a global market. So, but the challenge with that, therefore, is that there's millions of different wines out there, and how do you, as a punter, know the difference? You're not going to go around. Hopefully, you're not going to go around and taste all million of them. So you have to kind of, on a general basis or on a life basis, you kind of need to rely on cues in some manner, which is sadly not often very good cues. So they tend to be, how good is the packaging, or how good is the branding, or how much money has the winery spent on distribution, how well known is the name, or possibly how well appreciated is this wine amongst a critic or something like that, if you're on a higher level a sort of higher end wine. But ultimately, for most people, that's not really what they want. This kind of language of comparing wines with all these very complicated kind of fruit aromas or whatever is not really what engages people. I think most people have an idea as to the kind of wines or the kind of drinks that they actually want to drink. And what we were trying to do was to encourage them to experiment and reduce that sort of cost, the barrier for them to do it, and then use that as a way in order to sell wines that actually didn't have these big marketing budgets, and therefore more of the value, I guess, went into the juice rather than into the bottle or the label.
We will get onto Cordon, but let's say Ray and I spend our lives talking about getting companies off the ground and how many in the world of agritech fail a lot. So it's interesting to talk to someone who's grown a business that hasn't failed. It's a retail front with a machine, a piece of mechanization, essentially. So my question is, one of the big problems with agritech is these are highly complicated machines that we put into a highly complicated environment, and then and hope they work and hope that the person operating them can operate them correctly. So my question is, if you're going to put a machine in a retail environment, that sort of sounds quite scary to me. So was the machine something you guys developed yourselves, or was that something you worked with a partner on, or was there a company selling them anyway and you just were an early adopter? And how did that reliability piece go in a retail environment? That's really critical, I guess.
So the machine itself was actually developed more for a restaurant environment, and you actually sort of see it a little bit more in a kind of wine bar restaurant kind of situation more often. So I guess we worked closely with the engineering company that provided. We weren't the engineering company; we were the retailer, but we worked with them in order to make sure that there was the kind of the dispensing, the smart card system for being able to charge a card and then dispense a small amount of it. And then secondly, we had to work, the hardest bit of all was actually to change the UK licensing laws in order to make it possible to sell small samples. So we had to kind of work with newspapers and with politicians basically in order to get that changed, which was a slightly scary process. So actually, in comparison to the machinery, the legal aspect was much worse. So a bit like a compliance barrier. So we had to get through the compliance bit first. And then actually the machinery was just making sure that we didn't understaff it. So making sure that we had enough people on site, making sure that, if a machine went down, because machines break, they're not there forever. You got to look after them, you've got to service them, you've got to clean them, all that kind of stuff. Just making sure that we had the people trained up and on site and able to fix those, in the small areas that they went wrong. They were pretty reliable actually. And then making sure that we had a decent service contract with the supplier underlying it. And actually that side of things worked pretty well. It kind of, we had the odd problem from time to time, but it wasn't that the machines are very complicated, but actually they worked pretty well.
Oh, that seems slightly sort of analogous to the world of spray drones then, maybe, where all these companies have got these machines that they say now are highly reliable and highly, work really well, work out the box, but they're still operating, certainly in the UK, in an environment where there's not a lot they can do with them because of that legislation. So interesting. But obviously you managed to get through that, so that's impressive.
Well, if you get political will, I guess that's how you get that to change. But that's from a small company point of view, that's really hard to do. We kind of managed it because it was a consumer product, and there was specific dynamics going on with our local council. But it is a tough ask when it's pesticides.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So let's go on to the technology that you're now working on in Cordon. So can you explain? Obviously, you've explained the context and the site-specific application of different chemicals and sort of plant-specific, I guess. Can you explain what that looks like? What are the components on a machine? How is it working, etc.?
Yeah. So if you imagine kind of a current sprayer is basically a big tank, then a pump and fan and some nozzles. And the farmer fills the tank with water and with all of the chemicals, those are solids and liquids, that go into the spray session. They then mix them around and spray them out in a batch. What we do is we say to the customer, the farmer, look, you've already spent your money on your tractor and your sprayer. You're not going to want to replace those immediately. Keep them. So we just plumb into the existing sprayer. But we ask the farmer, instead of filling the tank with water and chemicals, just to put water in it. Because that's really simple to fill. You can actually use it in bowsers around the site if you've got a larger site. So the tank itself doesn't have any of the chemicals, doesn't need to be pre-mixed, any of that kind of stuff. You don't need to weigh your chemicals into it. Our mixer normally sits on the front of the tractor, so on the weight bar in the front of the tractor, or on a front 3-point head shift one's available, depending on the tractor itself. And it requires a hydraulic connection, but that's all it really requires. It doesn't matter what the sprayer is, it doesn't matter what the tractor is, as long as it can deliver 20, 25 litres, something like that, of hydraulic flow, it will be able to run. And into our mixer, it's called the loop, we load the chemicals, so the solids and the liquids, for the day spraying, basically. So it's been specified within a fruit farming kind of situation to have enough space within it to do an entire day spraying chemicals wise, and the only thing you then need to refill after that is the water tank. Yeah, so on a vineyard context, you might do 6, 7, 8 different refills a day, but this means you only need to do the water. And on top of that, you don't need to measure the liquids and weigh the solids, all of that kind of stuff. The machine does it for you, and the liquids stay in their original packaging. So it uses a closed transfer system. You don't touch it. It gets sort of pre-measured, I guess, or it's dosed in continuously. So that is all handled by the machine and by the setup. And that enables the farmer to kind of input in whatever way they want, input their agronomy for the spray session. They load in the chemicals into the mixer, they fill their tank with the first batch of water, and they go out and spray. They just press a button.
Are you able to work with the chemical containers that already exist, or are you having to dictate to people? Have you made a proprietary container, as it were, that has to be used?
Yeah, so there are a number of different closed transfer systems available in the market at the minute, which is a bit irritating. In reality, we've sort of taken a pragmatic approach to it. So we have a little adapter kit that's, if you take the screw cap container off any of the liquids that you get, it's a 2-minute job. You drill a hole, you put in our connector. It has a sort of a siphoning and a weight system and a filter within it that drops to the bottom of the liquid, and once it's done, it's kind of done. And you will then keep that for that chemical or within that liquid container, I guess, for the next time you use it.
Cool. Okay, then the next thing that came to my mind, Ray will jump in with something in a second, probably far more strategic, but I'm just thinking technically, is then when you're in the field and this is all operating and it's dosing chemical on the fly, are you basing that on pre-prescribed maps, or are you integrating any sort of cameras or real-time analysis into that dosing?
Yeah. So I guess we see it as a bit of a journey for the farmer. To begin with, it's actually neither of those. It's actually a button that says, I'm in block A, let's go to block B. Okay, so you may have a program for your say your September cauliflowers and a program for your October cauliflowers. And you just press a button and it changes the spray program as you go. Yeah, you don't have to get out, you don't have to wet, you don't have to change anything like that. So that's kind of the simplest, most kind of practical way to get people started. We're just about to release a GPS version with a prescription mapping tool. Again, that's relatively simple. It's just kind of, either import or draw your field or block boundaries and then just apply whatever prescription you want to. Now, we don't really get involved in the agronomy on that. We see that as the agronomist's job or the farmer's job. But we'd like to work with any kind of agronomy provider in order to make that as simple and as easy a process as possible. So if you have NDVI maps or any kind of sort of drone mapping, or frankly, just often it's just the farmer's view as to where vigor is or where disease is, they can paint that onto the view of the map and change their min-max rates according to how they want to farm it. The third step, which is some point in the future, which we've been doing lots of work on, but which we don't think the market is ready for yet, is the kind of proactive machine vision side. So we do have some AI-driven kind of machine learning or machine vision algorithms around canopy presence. We think the next one will be around canopy vigor, in order to do kind of I guess, proactive fertilization. But in honesty, we're doing it as a future rather than as a current. Where we see our goal at the minute is to get some of these relatively basic precision tools into specialty farming. You see some of these tools already in kind of cereal cropping and stuff like that, with variable rate application and things like that. But that just doesn't work in specialty farms. If you're doing row crops, if you're doing fruit of any type, if you're doing nurseries, it just doesn't really work. So we sort of see the challenge to begin with is just get some kit that is precision enabled into the hands of the customers and get them saving money. And if we can do that, we then think that in future they'll want to save more. And we think it also helps the agronomists as well, because it allows them to be able to give much more detailed, structured advice to their customers if the customer wants to have that.
I really like the approach, and I'm always a big fan of making use of the hardware you've already got, rather than sort of, I think often when you get agri-tech solutions, people come in and say, oh, chuck that thing you've got, chuck it in the hedge. You don't need that anymore. You need to buy this, and this. And from an adoption perspective, it suddenly you go from maybe adding a few £1,000s of technology to sort of completely replacing your whole suite and getting into tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I think sometimes that can be kind of the bridge too far for farmers and growers to kind of adopt. So I like that approach of saying, stick with what you've got, add what we've got to it, and all of a sudden you can kind of build out, make something cleverer and smarter and able to kind of help deliver a more precision approach. So I like the look of that. And I think I'm kind of thinking out loud now, but I know there's a company called Bitwise, isn't there, out in Australia, and I can imagine their sort of technology combining quite well with this. So they do sort of scanning, don't they? Basically with GoPros, I think the idea is approachable, low cost scanning technology, but again building the machine learning around that. So I could see a longer term where you've got that combined with a smart sprayer, and all of a sudden you've really leveraged you've leveraged the hardware that you've bought and deployed. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we sort of see it as a behavior change minimization. It's kind of, people have a way of spraying. I didn't want to put a robot with fancy nozzles and some sort of precision map and nighttime spraying or something into my vineyard. And so I can't imagine why another farmer would want to do that immediately. It's kind of I think it needs to be a kind of progression where you prove that it's useful to begin with, and then see where you get to. And then work with other people who are providing key elements of that process, so that, but ultimately the farmer's got to have an easier life in some manner. If you make it harder for them or more expensive for them, I just think it's kind of silly. I didn't have endless amounts of money to spend in my vineyard, and there aren't that many farms that do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and I think that's another good point around your sort of approach. Having operated a vineyard and being a grower, you're coming from the perspective of, you're not coming from that. Sometimes we get the ag tech solution of, this is what you need, grower, and they go, oh, is it? Oh, okay, and then they try and see if they can kind of shoehorn it into it. So you've very much designed a solution to a problem rather than sort of come up with a solution and hope it fits a problem somewhere. So again, I really like that approach. I suppose it'd be interesting just to sort of understand how it's kind of rolled out, what your kind of business model is. Is it, again, in ag tech, we've had over the last probably 10 years now, this sort of farming as a service or spraying as a service or whatever it might be as a service model. But how are you getting the hardware into growers' hands, and how are you approaching the business model?
We're still relatively early in our journey, I guess. And we launched the loop into production only at the end of the growing season last year. So we used UK vineyards as a kind of a test market, I guess, in order to, it's a market that I know relatively well. And obviously the agronomy side is something that I kind of understand. So we have been taking, we're just about to change that, and we'll announce something probably next week, actually. We have been taking a direct sales approach into that market and have, we think, done really pretty well within it. So we've currently got something like 12% of UK vineyard land is now being treated by our loop. And I mean, it's still a relatively small number of devices, but that's actually, we found that it seems to be, really useful, I guess, particularly for larger farms. But that's been a direct sale of the machinery, basically, with a kind of support contract. We will release next month our prescription mapping tool, and the goal with that's not so much to switch the business model, but it's to maybe enable ways that maybe, we could use a part rental, part upfront kind of contract in order to soften the upfront bill. It's not very expensive anyway. It only costs kind of £10,000-11,000 for a vineyard system. But in certain places, that's a capital budget rather than a kind of an OPEX budget. And we would like to work with customers in a way that they want to. So we are able to kind of charge, a mixture, I guess, of upfront and kind of monthly fees, and just kind of work with the customer. But I think it's fair to say that there's far too many. There's over 2 million vineyards in Europe, so we can't sell directly, long term. And actually, vineyards is only a very small part of who we want to sell to. So we are working already with. So we've just signed. So we just agreed. It's not announced yet, so I can't tell you who it's with. But it's with I think the largest vineyard agronomy company. We've signed a distribution deal with them to work with their customers. I think they've seen how it's doing within the vineyard market, and we've also started working on other crops. So we've just agreed a partnership with 2 of the largest bare root nurseries for forestry, who have very similar problems. They've dispersed fields with different spray requirements, operational problems. Their spray day is only 20% spraying and 80% filling and mixing and driving. And so if we can make a dent in that, then it's an immediate ROI, basically. And we're looking at other crop types as well. So we're looking in brassicas and top fruit, and in cane fruit as well. And we may even have a look at some of the cereal applications as well. So there's some changes that we need to make on the product in order to get up to the flow rates that's required on a big boom sprayer, but that's not the hard bit of the system.
Again, you've sort of naturally, and maybe almost by mistake because it's your background, but you've followed the route that in my view makes sense anyway. You're working in a high value crop. You can develop and start rolling out a technology in a high value crop, and then in time it can morph and change into the sort of more commodity market, as you commented on earlier, where price point is really key, but also other challenges like flow rates and just volumes and all those things.
It'll be interesting to see whether it's more or less compelling for somebody who's selling a commodity crop. It's one of those things that you could argue that because it's a marginal cost in a commodity business, that makes a bigger difference to the bottom line than it does in a premiumized product. But we just don't know yet. Yeah,
if you find yourself on a big enough farm, the chemical bills are certainly significant, and the logistics around spraying and getting the right chems in the right places is not trivial, let's say. So I'm sure there's wins to be had there. So I guess Ray obviously trailed us in at the start by saying that you've recently had some sort of funding successes. So maybe let's move slightly towards that, if you would, and tell us about what that funding is and what you're hoping to do with it, and the sort of the structures and things involved.
Yeah, so we're mostly closed. A £1 million round led by British Design Fund, with a bunch of other kind of co-investors and some of our existing VCs. So British Design Fund, or BDF, is there to kind of take British designed physical product companies, and to try and build those out on a more global kind of basis. So that kind of aligns really well with what we're trying to do. We're also, brought money in from other investors, including people like BritBots, who are one of the big UK British robotics companies. Because what we do is kind of robotics. It just doesn't have any wheels, or it doesn't move. It stays static, but it has all the sensors and the software, and it's basically the same sort of thing. So we're in the process of that'll close in the next couple of weeks, and I'm almost immediately into the next funding round. So I'm off to California next week in order to start that process. It never ends.
Yeah. So, California, that might be another conversation again. But yeah, what is it that this most recent round, what's that can enable you to do? I mean, explain how that works.
Yeah, so I guess our goal, we'll see what actually happens, but our goal is to, on the one hand, build out a kind of a predictable kind of pipeline, I guess, on the vineyard side. So, to take the small bits of success that we've had at the minute and then build that out so that we end up, showing value within that. And then to prove that it's not just vineyards, and that this is also useful in a broader range of different crop types. And I guess our feeling from a strategic point of view is that if we can show that it's exciting for a number of different crops, and that we have the ability to actually capitalize on any one of those just by being in the market and by delivering good product to customers that end up liking the product, then we think that's highly investable in. That doesn't make it any easier to actually do it, but I guess that's the goal.
I'll ask you a bit about the California thing, because that came to my mind it was when Ray was saying about company in Australia with the camera system. I instantly thought of like Agtonomy in California with their Bobcat and Kubota tractors that drive themselves. Often they're also selling those with sort of camera systems to do canopy mapping and things like that. And I was just thinking, there seems to be like quite a nice tie there. So, what are your California plans? Is it to talk to people like that, or is it to also the vineyards there, or is it actually the tech funders?
Yeah, we're slightly more unashamedly customer focused rather than partnership. That, if I'd love to have enough time to do loads of partnerships as well, but kind of we have customers that want to take the loop on, and we need to work out how we can operationally support that. I think the big risk, and no doubt you guys have seen it with lots of other kind of ag tech companies in the past, is how do you support an expansion that could be operationally quite challenging if it's multi-country. So we're doing it, I would say, cautiously rather than enthusiastically. But what we must make sure is that we know the customers and understand things like the compliance challenges as you go from one geography to another geography, and we need to know that before we do it. So I guess the key focus is to make sure that we understand what some of those things like nut farming in California is enormous. Gallo is the world's largest grape producer in the Central Valley in California. It's Salinas, all the vegetable stuff that happens there. So just meeting people and talking to them and understanding where they're going from a direction point of view. And then on the second front is just talking to investors basically. So again, preparing that ground in order for future fundraisings. It seems I'd rather not do that, but that's it's just the way of the world, isn't it? Yeah.
It's probably worth actually you checking out one of our previous episodes. We spoke to Connie Bowen, didn't we?
I know Connie a little bit.
Yeah. So Kit, you met her a few times out there, and she very kindly agreed to come on the podcast. So it was a really good episode to kind of get behind the scenes, especially for us as engineers, to kind of understand a little bit about kind of how the venture world works, but also kind of she's got a very we like it. She's a bit brash with Brash Ag, and she is a bit brash, which was good, and it was good to get her thoughts. So yeah, definitely worth checking that out. I think it'd be cool to kind of get your take on like the IP side of things. So Kit and I have a sort of an ongoing constant debate around, do you do you put the time in to build out the IP, get the patents, and do that side of things, or do you try and move as quickly as possible, forget about that, or do you try and do both? Yeah, I mean, how have you? I suppose there's sort of two layers to it. What's your strategy been? I've seen you've got patented technology, so I can kind of already see, you've taken an approach there. And how have you actually found that process in terms of, like, has it been easy or has it been tricky?
Yeah, I mean, it is complicated. I guess what we're doing is quite unusual. So we haven't seen anybody really anywhere that has a similar approach to what we're doing. Yeah, so the problem exists, and people are addressing it maybe a little bit more often from the nozzle point of view than they are from the spray mix point of view. But because it's a different way of thinking about the problem, and because we've now spent a number of years fettling the technology and getting over a lot of the technical barriers about how to control this accurately and reliably, we do think that there's something relatively broad that we can patent. So obviously the broader a patent is, the more valuable it is. Having said that, it's also super expensive and time consuming to do so. So what we don't want to do is to have huge numbers of different small patents. So what we've tried to do is to go for a single, we've actually ended up with 2 at the minute, but a single, as broad as possible patent on the concept itself, and try to make that as hard to design around as possible. You never totally succeed. There'll always be someone who's, if they're determined to be in the market, they'll find a way around around what you've done. But we think that what we've patented is pretty all-encompassing in terms of what we're doing, but the proof is in the pudding. We also then kind of supplement that with trade secrets. It's kind of, if you patent everything, it's then the downside to that is it's available globally. So quite a lot of what we've done, I guess the approach that our CTO Tom, who's sort of ex-Dyson, would be able to explain this much better than I do. But I guess our approach has been to try to optimize the hardware in order to make the systems as linear as possible, and then use software algorithms in order to smooth out any non-linearities left, but to keep the details of how exactly that is done just trade secret. So, and actually it'd be hard even to reverse engineer it, because it's not clear why a large number of things are done the way that they're done. But that is, it would be much more challenging to work out why we've done a large number of things. If we published that all in the patent, it would be totally obvious. And there may be other approaches as to why we do it. I have no idea whether that's the right approach, but it's somewhat affordable.
I think I've heard that approach described around sort of Rolls-Royce jet engines at some point, that they're on a continual improvement basis, just because ultimately they know that people buy their engines and strip them down and try and copy them. So they're constantly developing things as much as anything just to keep ahead, if that makes any sense. And they're not telling people what they're doing. They're just constantly pushing things forwards in like the Trent engines and stuff like that to keep ahead and marginally chip away at the fuel efficiency or whatever it might be. But yeah, as I say, Ray and I talk about this a lot, and it's that thing of, if the patent costs you lots of money and then you can't afford to defend the patent, and you've gone and told the world what you're doing by publishing the patent, for me it always seems like not a particularly useful thing to do. It's great you've got plenty of money to defend it and you've got plenty of team and you can cover all bases, but I always I always sit myself in the mindset of a small company that's trying to get going, and I just think, let's get stuff to the field and be the people to beat in terms of market share as much as anything.
I think, though, if you think of longer term, if there's a chance that the company is going to be acquired, that's where the money comes from to defend a patent. It's not likely to be VC money or
Yeah, I was going to say that. I was going to say also, I guess the IP thing does have a benefit to the value of your company as well. If at some point you're hoping to exit or sell, etc. So I understand that from a valuation point of view, it is important stuff.
It'd be interesting, I suppose, just to get your thoughts on it. I mean, it sounds like you've got a lot of road. You kind of got a lot of road to run in terms of markets to break into and progress to make. But what's your aims for the future with the business? Where do you want to take it? And are you looking ultimately at an exit at some point, or are you wanting to sort of build the business up and run it? What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I guess we think, we don't know, and maybe every company feels this way, but we think that we have a chance of building a really big business with this because it is so different from what everybody else is. The approach is just fundamentally different. Now, we have a big mountain ahead of us in order to actually execute on that, but we would like to build that business. It's not. I don't want to build a cash flow positive. I've done that before. I had a profitable winery and I had a profitable retailer. It's nice, it's comfortable, but it doesn't change the world. It just makes a bit of money. There is more to life than just making a bit of money. It's I thought it was kind of disgusting the way that we had to spray our vineyard, even though we were trying to take care of it. And I think that seems to be common across all of farming, basically all of crop farming. I would honestly like to improve that. And I think that could be done on a global basis. The gap between where we are now and where that is enormous. So, whether we'll get there, who can tell, but we can try.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I'd like to maybe push you on that a little bit, because I mean, there have been technologies about doing on the fly mixing and sort of multiple spray lines down a boom into a nozzle and things like that. Those systems have existed and have been sold. Again, I always like to drop a random personal anecdote into this, and it's not even really a personal one, but I remember when Ray and I were at university, one of our colleagues, Chris White, he worked for Housen Sprayers for his placement year, and he ended up spending 3 weeks in Moldova fitting an injection system, or a system to get away from tank mix to a sprayer in Moldova, and yeah, stuck in my mind just because of all the randomness of that very situation. But if you knew Chris, you'd understand why that'd be a strange place for him to be. So my question would be, bear in mind systems have existed in the past that haven't taken off, haven't taken hold in a mainstream way. What makes you think that your system can grow to be that big company and can take hold?
So I think there's a few technical reasons behind it. So, if you're building a sprayer with multiple lines within it, that becomes a replacement market rather than a kind of I guess an addition. So the capital cost for the customer is significantly higher, and there's all the technical risk that comes alongside that. There are specific reasons why we don't believe, and there's some very large players in the industry who agree with us, that injection systems are not the right way of doing this. So in terms of a fluid control management basis, they're very, very hard to get right. And actually, if you really think about it, an injection system, you are limited to liquids. So if you think about the cheapest, most day-to-day kind of additions that you actually want to spray, they're actually solids. So they're, in a vineyard context, they might be micronizable sulfur, they might be copper sulfate, they might be magnesium sulfate, sort of Epsom salts, kind of, not the most glamorous kind of inputs, but actually it's the day-to-day stuff. And if you have an injection system, you can't do that. So you end up then having to do this kind of hybrid approach. It all gets very complicated. You get precision in some and not the others. So I just don't feel that that's a way that fits into farmers' workflow today. What we're trying to do is to get a system that fits into when the agronomist says, this is what I want to spray in a day. How, if you're the farmer and you wake up in the morning, how are you going to set up your sprayer in order to deliver that kind of spray plan? How do you make that easy? And I guess that's what we've worked really hard in order to try and make sure that it's fast and responsive and fits into their workflow, doesn't force them to do something expensive or risky or different, or it comes down to the same sort of that customer focus, I guess. But who knows? Yeah, there's no guarantee.
Well, I think it's really exciting technology, and it's cool to kind of see, the how you could leverage that across, multiple different strands of agriculture and horticulture. And I think you definitely, in my opinion, I think you're definitely doing the right thing of sort of building it out for a known problem, building out that market, and then looking at other ways in which you can use that technology to serve others. I think that is a really good approach. I think I've worked for and worked with startups that have been a bit too sort of scatterbombed and kind of gone, well, we can do all this for everybody, and you kind of lose your focus. You lose that sort of, you don't get that really good voice of the customer coming back saying, well, this bit doesn't work and that doesn't quite work, because it's like, oh, well, on to the next one. So I think that's really good. I suppose it'd be interesting, obviously you've kind of got you've got a really interesting background. It'd be cool to get your take on, in terms of, other than obviously what you're working on, what sort of transformative technologies do you think are sort of working their way through the system, and what's going to make some of the biggest differences? Maybe perhaps again in the vineyard viticulture space.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a lot of kind of ground cover controls, so sort of weeding technologies that seem to actually be getting a bit of traction these days. So whether it's in vineyards or within row cropping or within cereals, even if you look at some of the work that carbon robotics is doing on lasers, or eco robotics, with their kind of spot spraying for weeds, or root wave, I guess, with electric kind of weeding within vineyards. There's a very different space, or not space, but a very different, I guess, use case or problem space maybe than what we're looking at. But it looks to me like that's actually seeing some real customer traction and customer deployment, which is exciting, because agtech hasn't had a huge amount, over the last kind of 10 or 20 years. And I think that some of the VCs are now beginning to see that as well, which is what everybody needs. We need more capital coming in to build companies that are real companies, not just sort of hype machines, and where you can then take the returns from one investment and plow them into the next company and start building an ecosystem of a huge number of companies doing interesting things. So I think on the machinery side, that kind of weed control thing seems to be really happening. And secondly, obviously the autonomy stuff is similar, kind of whether it's robotic or kind of guided diesel engines, doesn't really matter. But that's looking again, that's more on the time saving or labor saving kind of area. But that seems to be getting traction as well. It seems to be actually, these systems now actually work.
Okay, and Jamie, so Ray's asked you what technologies you see working into this ag space with the context of maybe your background and things. I'm going to ask you what that drew in my mind. What have you felt working in agri-tech in the last, for a few years compared to your background, be it as a scientist at university, through to being a VC, through to being a wine retailer? How do you feel about yourself working in agriculture on a daily basis? I ask this because we're always, Ray and I think being an ag engineer is the best job in the world, and we can't understand why we don't have queues of people wanting to study it and queues of people wanting to call themselves as agricultural engineers. How have you felt coming into the world that we love from where you've been in the past?
Well, I guess I was in an agricultural kind of setting, in deep rural France for 8 years. So I kind of have, kind of seen it from the very traditional kind of point of view. I do think it's very exciting, and obviously I'm kind of biased, but we've got a great team of depressingly young people who are enthusiastic to get in the morning and think that they're making a difference in the world. And I suppose what the industry needs is some really big winners that kind of make the whole thing a bit more sexy. I suppose it's the risk is always that people are think that it's tragic, kind of muddy fields and grumpy farmers, and there is a bit of that, but I'd rather be in a muddy field with a grumpy farmer than being stuck in an office with an accountant all day. I mean, there's the reality, and it's more real. It's more important. That you have to feed people. It's kind of, it's more important than really any other industry. So it will happen. It's I don't know when, but it will happen.
I think it's probably a good place to kind of round things off. Can we make agricultural engineering and ag tech a bit more sexy? And I think that was one of the reasons we wanted to speak to you, is because there is a good news story in there in terms of having, you guys have landed the funding. So I think that's really exciting, and obviously wish you all the best in the future in terms of taking that forwards, and perhaps we could catch up again in a few years' time or a year's time and see how you've got on, or even catch you at a show somewhere.
Yeah, I'm going to say we'll be looking out for a show stand in future, Agritechnica or something maybe. Or you should get yourself. Have you ever been to EMA in Bologna, in Italy?
I haven't. No.
You need to go.
Good food there.
It is the best.
For the trade show.
Yeah. It is the world's best agricultural show, in my humble opinion, having been to quite a few. Better than Agritechnica, because the machinery is also novel and interesting, because there's so much stuff related to Mediterranean crops, let's say. So it's all unusual and interesting machines, plus the big stuff that we all recognise. And and you can get a really good bottle of wine, and you can get a really good pasta, and it's a really great show. You should look it up. Raymond, who are we going to ask to check out the Brash Ag podcast this week?
Who are we going to tell? So we are, I think, with all this talk of wine, I think you should go and tell your sommelier.
Of course,
to listen to Brash Ag.
Of course, your sommelier will get a lot from this episode. So when you're next consulting your sommelier, just say, "Have you been listening to the Brash Ag podcast?" I think you should.
Exactly. Quite.
Perfect.
I was at your house yesterday, and I didn't actually meet your in-house sommelier. So
I'd given him the afternoon off, Ray. So, yeah,
very good.
I don't think he would have found a lot to be happy with in my wine rack. Maybe my whiskey cabinet is more up to spec. Anyway, for everyone who has been, thank you very much for listening. Jamie, it's been really great to hear from you and all about what you're doing at Cordon. And if you have been, like, subscribe, follow the pod, all the things we boringly have to ask you to do, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Raymond King and Kit Franklin. Brash Ag. Thank you, and tune in next time.